In this presentation of the final chapter of Awake Bride, I will review the false doctrines which have precluded most Christians from understanding end times. Daniel 2 describes the four metals of Nebuchadnezzar's dream statue. Daniel 7 describes four beasts. It has been wrongly taught that they represent the same kingdoms. The statue represented the four world empires who persecuted the Jews prior to Christ's first coming. The four beasts represent the four world empires who persecute Jews prior to Christ's second coming. Historians record the persecution of Christians by 10 different Roman Caesars, not 9 or 12, but 10. These 10 Caesars are the 10 toes of the statue, which ended in 310 AD. Then in 313 AD, Constantine declared the whole Roman Empire to be Christian, which led to the destruction of the Roman Empire 100 years later. Daniel 2:34 and 35. You saw till that a stone was cut out without hands, which smote the image on his feet, and broke them to pieces. Then was the iron, the clay, the brass, the silver, and the gold broken to pieces together, and became like the chaff of the summer threshing floors, and the wind carried them away, that no place was found for them. And the stone that smote the image became a great mountain, and filled the whole earth. Christianity completely destroyed the statue kingdoms. There will be no revived Roman Empire. Daniel chapters 2 through 7 were written in the language of the Gentiles because they deal specifically with the timeline of the Gentiles. Daniel chapters 8 through 12 were written in Hebrew because they deal specifically with Israel. The circled prophecies concern events prior to or during Christ's first coming. The boxed prophecies concern Christ's second coming. The ram's 2 horns represent the Medes and Persians. The goat's great horn represents Alexander the Great of Greece. In the statue, these 2 empires are the silver arms and brass belly, respectively. Daniel first mentions the little horn while describing the 4th beast in chapter 7. So the Gentiles will see him arise from the Muslim Federation and reign for a time, times and a half a time. Daniel describes in Hebrew how another little horn would come from the Greek goat nation through Syria to rule over them for 2,300 days. Alexander the Great is the notable horn who conquered the Medes and Persians in 333 BC. He died 10 years later. Syria, one of the horns, was eventually ruled by Antiochus Epiphanes, who invaded Egypt in 170 BC and again in 168, each time going through Israel. He had a pig sacrificed in the temple to Zeus and tortured the Jews. He decided to exterminate the Jews, but became deathly ill and stated, "It is appropriate to be subject to God, and a man who is mortal should not proudly think of himself as if he were God." 2,300 days is 6 2/3 years, using a 360-day year. That correlates to the reign of terror Antiochus had upon Jerusalem. So Antiochus IV fulfilled Daniel's transgression of desolation. Though the 2,300 days were fulfilled by Antiochus, coupled with Alexander's conquest date, it yields the date 1967 when the Jews regained the Temple Mount. And Jesus said, Jerusalem shall be trodden down of the Gentiles until the times of the Gentiles be fulfilled. Antiochus IV also fulfilled most of Ezekiel 38 and 39. This is a prophecy against Gog. Ezekiel was contemporary with Daniel and Jeremiah, who all were deported by Babylonians. But 100 years earlier, it was the Assyrians who were taking the northern tribes into exile. At that time, Hosea, Micah, and Isaiah were prophesying about current attacks of the Assyrians, but also about a future attack in which the Assyrian would be overthrown. Isaiah 14. The Lord of hosts has sworn, saying, Surely as I have thought, so shall it come to pass, and as I have purposed, so shall it stand, that I will break the Assyrian in my land, and on my mountains tread him under foot. Then shall his yoke depart from off them, and his burden depart from off their shoulders. And I will smite your bow out of your left hand, and will cause your arrows to fall out of your right hand. The Maccabees of Judea used guerrilla warfare against the troops of Antiochus, often dividing their small numbers so as to surround a narrow passage in the hills and pick off the enemies, but they also won in open field battles. During the time that Antiochus' troops warred against them, the Maccabean armies killed 250,000 of Gog's armies. That's enough bodies to keep a burial team busy for 7 months. Ezekiel 39:12. And 7 months shall the house of Israel be burying them, that they may cleanse the land. Since Antiochus often used mercenary troops, like Persians, Ethiopians, and Libyans, they would drop their weapons and run. That's enough weaponry to burn for fuel for 7 years. Ezekiel 39:9. And they that dwell in the cities of Israel shall go forth, and shall set on fire and burn the weapons, both the shields and the bucklers, the bows and the arrows, and the handstaves and the spears, and they shall burn them for fire for 7 years. We already read the first, in which Antiochus causes the transgression of desolation, which begins the time of the Gentile occupation of the Temple Mount. In the second, his army pollutes the sanctuary with pig's blood, takes away the daily sacrifice, and places the statue of Zeus in the temple, causing the abomination that makes desolate. This is well documented in the books of Maccabees. Daniel 9:27. And he shall confirm the covenant with many for 1 week, and in the midst of the week he shall cause the sacrifice and the oblation to cease, and for the overspreading of abominations he shall make it desolate, even until the consummation, and that determined shall be poured upon the desolate. Due to the overspreading of Jewish abominations, Messiah was going to make the temple desolate. Messiah Jesus made a covenant with many believers when his Father declared him his beloved Son at his baptism in the fall of 29 AD. 3.5 years later, Jesus' sacrifice caused the veil of the temple to split in two, causing oblations to cease. Jesus had warned his people that the desolation of their temple would come within a generation or 40 years. In the spring of 67 AD, Israel rebelled against Rome, and 3.5 years later, Jerusalem and its temple were destroyed, and the power of the holy people was scattered. All the temple buildings, all these things, were made desolate. What I have just described is the fulfillment of Daniel's 70-week prophecy. It begins with Artaxerxes' decree to send Nehemiah back to rebuild Jerusalem. Isaiah 42:6 and 7 says, I, the Lord, have called you in righteousness, and will hold your hand, and will keep you, and give you for a covenant of the people, for a light of the Gentiles, to open the blind eyes, to bring out the prisoners from the prison, and them that sit in darkness out of the prison house. Jesus is the new covenant. John the Baptist announced him as the Lamb of God who takes away the sins of the world. Jesus is cut off, crucified, after 3.5 years, leaving a period of 3.5 years for the consummation of desolation for the overspreading of Israel's abominations to occur within a generation of 40 years. That Daniel's 70-week prophecy was fulfilled was an accepted fact until the 1800s, when the theory of evolution and the pre-tribulation rapture theory became popular. This is the only passage from which a 7-year tribulation can be deduced. Since the 70th week has already been fulfilled, there is no reason to look for someone in the future to establish a 7-year covenant with Israel, nor is there reason to look for a generation after Israel became a nation for something to occur. It already did. But Daniel has one more abomination that makes desolate, which is set up, that has not yet been fulfilled. Daniel 12:11-12. And from the time that the daily sacrifice shall be taken away, and the abomination that makes desolate set up, there shall be 1,290 days. Blessed is he that waits, and comes to the 1,335 days.